What is good, everybody? So excited today. We're talking about positioning. This one skill can change everything. And I've been playing Halo for like 20 years. I wish I spent more time refining this element of my gameplay sooner. It's one of the most critical parts of FPS gameplay. You'll see in the background, it is going to be a perfection nightmare. And I was so stoked I got this match, and then I realized I wasn't recording live, so I had to hop back into the theater mode. There might be some weird bugs and glitches because, man, the infinite theater mode is pretty crazy. My videos are typically geared towards intermediate players, so you silver, gold, platinum, diamond players. Focus in on some of these concepts big time. For the Onyx folks, you probably already have a good spawn knowledge as well as map control like fundamentals that will allow you to look at this as maybe a fundamental refinement. So let's talk about positioning. I've tried to break it down into 3 elements you want to be evaluating throughout your match, whether or not your position is correct. Does your position apply pressure? So does your position threaten opponents' intended actions? Does your position control? Does it control power weapons or power-ups, important sightlines? Does it control objectives? Does it work with your teammates to control engagements? And does your position provide safety and opportunities to reposition? Oftentimes, we've talked about this on my FPS tip videos the last few years. Positions of height typically give you the option to not only have an advantageous engagement, it's really hard to take a fight with somebody who's high above you, but also if you're losing that fight and you're controlling a spot of height, it gives you opportunities to reposition, fall back to your teammates, and not be sitting in that respawn timer. So those 3 elements are things you want to be evaluating continually throughout your matches. And there's one further concept I want to at least throw in here before we dive deeper, and that is angle isolation. This is awareness of the exposure you have to the angles and sightlines on the map. Basically, only exposing yourself to one vulnerable angle if possible, and ideally that angle would be the one that you're fighting on. This is just an awareness of where people are on the map currently and where they could spawn, and not putting yourself out in the middle of nowhere to where you could get shot from like 8 different angles. Before we hop into specific spawn prediction tips you can use, I want to talk about today's sponsor, FRAG Pro Shooter. FRAG is a shooter game for mobile that over 100 million people have played. For those of you who don't know FRAG just yet, there are 100 unique characters available in this bright, colorful, and fast-paced shooter game. You get to pick 5 of those characters to build out your dream team and then develop your own strategy. The first team to destroy the enemy tower wins. Another element about FRAG gameplay I really like are the controls. This thing feels good to play on mobile. They've done a really nice job with the controls, making the gameplay feel very crispy. Now with so many characters, I want to highlight here 3 of the best right off the bat. There's Ronin, who puts out a ton of damage, Zap Girl, who affects just about everybody on the map, and Mr. Tiger, who was recently buffed. I mean, look at this guy. I love Mr. Tiger. And there's some very special rewards for you all free if you click my link in the description below or the QR code on the screen. You get to hop in with a golden chest, 5,000 coins, 200 diamonds, and a few other goodies. Thanks to the folks over at FRAG Pro Shooter for sponsoring today's video. If you think about it in an FPS game, there's really 2 main macro level concepts. How well do you aim at the opponent and shoot them? And then also where do you move on the map to assist in that? Those are the 2 main pillars that you have to be thinking about. I want to at least encourage you guys to check out some of the Walshy highlights that I've linked in the description below. Walshy is one of the wisest in the game, and he was extremely smart with his positioning. And a lot of his gameplay, you can see it's not necessarily the most flashy, flicky, crazy fast aim sensitivity plays, but rather very methodical, beautiful positioning that enabled him to come clutch for his team on many occasions. So for a very practical, simple example, I want to show you guys here on streets, the rocket launcher spawn. If you were to be playing down on these lower streets throughout the majority of a streets gameplay, you would be in a very unadvantageous position. Think about it. Does this really apply direct pressure to an opponent's intended actions? Not really. Most people aren't going to be running through the dead center of this map unless the rockets are up. Does it control power weapons or important sightlines or objectives? Well, it can help you control the oddball spawn, but beyond that, no, there's not a whole lot of useful things down here. Plus, it doesn't provide you much safety. There is almost no angle isolation when you're down out in the middle of nowhere out here. This is something where you're exposed to 4 different really important sightlines and you can't watch all of them at once. There's no cover for you to get to unless you get out of this area. which is why they put the rocket launcher here. It's why they put the oddball down here. It's an area that's very exposed that promotes a lot of, contesting and gunfights where people want to get in and get out to get to a more advantageous position. Whereas if you're up here or if you're over here, there's a lot of arguments to say, well, at least over here, I've got the shotgun. And up here, I've got a very important area of the map that's got chokes, sightlines, and opportunities to reposition, as well as applying pressure to the two primary big spawns on this map. Those are generalized positioning tips that you want to be thinking about for every single map that you're playing, but it goes one step deeper, and that is the game sense. Understanding what's happening in the match at any given time, and then how that's going to influence the spawns. All right, let's talk about spawn prediction. It really comes down to understanding what half of the map your team is occupying and what half of the map the enemy is occupying. It's never that simple, obviously, because everybody is always spread out in different locations, but most of the backbone of spawn knowledge and fundamentals come from understanding who's past the 50-yard line. I get this question a lot from new players. How do you predict where enemies are going to spawn and where they're going to be coming from? It's a combination of a lot of things, and there is no easy one solution. Here's how you get better at it. Honestly, playing more FPS games is a good way to do it, but being intentional can accelerate that curve. So basically, think what half the map that you and your teammates are on. If you've got one guy who's pushed into no man's land over on the other, half of the map, it's likely that the enemies aren't going to spawn there. They'll be spawning in some of the secondary spawns that will be on the sides of the map. But in general, if you've got team of 4 on one half, team of 4 on the other half, they're going to keep spawning on their half of the map. That's probably the most basic and simplistic way to think about it. If you want to go further, it's great to learn the spawns of the individual maps by going into theater mode. And every time somebody dies, go into third person and look and see where they spawned. It's even easier in Infinite because you can turn on the outlines of players on the keyboard. I think it's the F and the R key by default. And I don't know what the outline key is on controller, but you can now do that, which is really cool. That's a really good way to start understanding what the primary spawns are. And then the more you play these maps, the more you're going to learn about some of the secondary spawns. You can get even more granular, and spawns are influenced not only by the position, but also where players are looking. So if you're directly staring at one of the available spawns with your crosshairs, I think that decreases the likelihood of them spawning there. It can get really complex really quickly. But in general, you improve your knowledge of where opponents are going to be playing the game, by watching theater back, and just by understanding some generalized respawning traits. If you'd like to see me go into a further deep dive video on that in the future, just let me know. So let's bring it all back to the beginning. Positioning matters far more than your accuracy. You want to reposition when you evaluate the three main elements here. Does it apply pressure? Does it control? And does it provide safety? If it doesn't, on multiple of those accounts, it's time to reposition to a spot that does allow that. Additionally, you want to be thinking about where your teammates are, that's game sense, along with spawn knowledge to reposition and evaluate that position. This all comes down to awareness. On ranked, you're not going to have a radar for this. Listening, looking at your teammates' indicators, and also if you can play with some teammates who are going to call out, will all help you in these decision-making moments. I also play fighting games, and your footsies, or where you're positioned on the screen, matters big time. It's a huge part of the gameplay loop within these competitive fighting games. You can look at your positioning in the same way as footsies in an FPS title. They afford you options. They afford you important control over map items, such as the power-ups or the power weapons, and they give you opportunities to execute plays that your enemy is not suspecting. In Halo, in general, positions of height tend to give you a lot of control over the map. It's really hard to shoot back at somebody who is above you. They can just walk backwards and pop back out anywhere they want to. Additionally, just hiding out in your initial spawn isn't going to give you a lot of opportunities to put pressure on your enemy, nor is it going to control any of those objectives. So plenty of times in the middle of the map is usually where some of these power positions are. There's no such thing as a guidebook that will get you to perfect positioning. It comes down to all of these different factors, and every single match is going to shift slightly. But there's general rules of thumb that you want to be aware of. Think of the streets example. You don't want to be out here in no man's land because it doesn't allow you any sort of angle isolation. Same thing goes with live fire. You wouldn't want to just live right out here. This is going to get you absolutely toasted. So keep in mind those generalized tips and the three elements to evaluate your position in each of your matches. You can click the video on screen to check out a warm-up routine you should be doing before you hop into ranked matchmaking. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please hit the like button, and I'll see you again in the next video.